DLC, we always focus on business and lifestyle. We always acknowledge the creative world and what they have to offer and bring to the table, but we often don't look at them as true business people or entrepreneurs. For me, while I meet somebody, and I personally do come from the arts background myself, what excites me is to understand how they've built their own brand, their own legacy, and what they do with it. So today we've got 3 very successful women, and my whole purpose was, while we talk a little about their journeys and what they've done, to know how they actually handle growing it. When you're in the forefront and realm of what you do, whether it's managing teams of people up to 200 employees and recruiting for really fast-paced and growing firms, whether it's building and advising politicians, Nobel Prize winners and brands globally, or it's going through leadership and transformation for companies, that are always listed, or you open the Financial Times, and I'm sure you'll find a couple of the companies that Deborah has worked and consulted with. So when you're in that position where you need to put up that face, how do you personally come back home and tackle imposter syndrome? And I think this is a question that we always tend to have and ask. We don't realize more often than not when a compliment is passed how it's immediately dodged away, or when some successes are achieved, people humbly bow and say, thank you, I appreciate it, but you're just being too kind. So women that actually advise people to overcome this, women that guide and mentor people to do this, I thought, why not pick on their brains, talk to them, hear a little about their journey, and do it. So today I would like to invite Elin, founder and CEO of Style Doctors. You with 18 years of experience as a personal stylist and businesswoman. She comes as an energetic entrepreneur, business leader, whether artists, professionals, she helps them develop their own personal brand and has coached even Nobel Prize winners, royal families, and frequently appeared on media and television. Welcome, Elin.
Thank you very much.
The next lady we have today is Abigail Wilmore. Abigail is the Chief People Officer at Dr. Barbara Sturm. Barbara Sturm is a skincare brand, and for those of you that don't know it, I did a little bit of digging up, and I saw that they're projecting a $50 million revenue at some point soon enough. And I think, being at the realm of a company that manages these people, I think is absolutely wonderful. Abigail independently also works with people and personalities, and while she is inspiring and heart-centered with consulting, coaching, and unlocking potential, helping individuals and teams, she's also the founding partner at Henley Collective, and my personal favorite, the former Chief People Officer at Stella McCartney LVMH. So Abigail, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. And finally, we've got Deborah Hume, founder Minerva Engagement. Deborah comes from our Leadership and Transformation Committee. She's instrumental in delivering change across multinational organizations, combining learnings from science with a deep understanding of the realities of effective practical application. Deborah works with businesses to access the potential that lies within every organization and team. Welcome, Deborah.
We work with corporate entities on developing their staff style, down from kind of staff levels up to CEO levels. We work with large global companies such as Lexus and Toyota, creating style guides for them. So back in 2004, when I founded the company, there was a huge gap in the market for personal styling services for, I say, real people like this, because I know everyone's real, but it was for everyday people, because back then it was only available for celebrities and VIPs. And I think that that's still one thing that I'm very, very passionate about, is being able to give access to everyday people to a service that helps develop them. So I think a lot of people tend to think that clothing especially is something that's an afterthought, and that you shouldn't spend too much time thinking about what you're wearing. But in fact, all of you in this room today have made a conscious decision about what you're putting on this evening, because it gives a message to the rest of the world about how you want everyone to perceive you, basically. So, I'm coming from a place where I think clothing is incredibly important, not just from a perspective of something that you actually have to wear every day, but that the message it gives other people and the way it makes you feel about yourself as well. So one of my milestones then, I guess, is being able to expand the company globally. So we expanded to the US in 2016 and then to the UAE in 2018. And since we launched in the UAE, we have become the official styling company for one of the largest malls in the UAE, which is Mall of the Emirates as well. And we see a lot of clients in that region. And one of my colleagues is here with me this evening as well. She's traveled to Dubai, from Dubai here, especially for this evening, yeah? Yeah. And yes, so yeah, they're my milestones. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Elin.
So I actually wanted to be a ballerina when I grew up. I was desperate to be a ballerina and I practiced every day. But when I was about 16, I realised it probably I wasn't going to be good enough for it. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do. My whole family was very academic. My mother was an artist, my father a mathematician, but they'd all gone to uni. I didn't go to uni. I just really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I actually started on the shop floor, which was a brilliant experience. I started work at Estee Lauder. And then within a couple of years, I realised that I really enjoyed the people aspect of what I was doing. So a role came up in human resources and I went for it. And that was where my journey really started in HR. And I just kind of worked my way up. I stayed with Estee Lauder for a really long time. I tried a couple of other industries. I knew that, HR was really what I loved to do. And then I got the job at Gucci Group. I feel a bit of an imposter when I say how I got that. I always use the term luck, but it was not really just luck, obviously. And so, yeah, I began working for Gucci Group, which was an incredible opportunity for me. And that's really where my career started to take off. I was working for the two British luxury brands, Alexander McQueen and Stella McCartney, which was just amazing. And then I guess one of my milestones was at that point where I got promoted to being an executive. I was one of the youngest executives in the Gucci Group at the time, which is like the top kind of 300 people of the leadership team. And then I became fully dedicated to Stella McCartney, which was, again, an incredible experience working for a really purpose-led organisation with founder, there and very present, giving a lot of energy to the organisation. And then, I left at the end of last year. I started my own business. I'm a qualified coach. Now what I love to do is bring human-centered people solutions to businesses, but I also work for Dr. Barbara Stone, which is an incredible skincare brand, really high growth, plus 50% year on year. It's really, really exciting to be there and help to kind of shape the culture there. So that's my story.
And Abigail, a personal milestone, something that you along the way have always looked back and been very happy about.
I think it was being promoted to being an executive, one of the youngest execs. Although I have to say that working with Alexander McQueen himself was probably something that I will cherish the most, because obviously he was one of the greatest visionary creatives of our time. So that was a real moment that I remember.
Lovely.
So, how do you follow that? Honestly, I suppose if I kind of turn it around a little bit, one of the things that I'm most surprised about my career is that you never know where you're going to end up, and where you start isn't where you end up. And the road that you take can have many twists and turns. So, in all honesty, I grew up in an agricultural environment and they weren't particularly focused on academics at the time. So, as much as it was a fabulous family, I left school at 16 with just a few O levels to my name. And my father had a view that I was going to make a very good farmer's wife, which was completely not my life plan. So I remember having a very difficult moment after I'd struggled for about a year trying to do something that I didn't want to do, realising that I was going to have to break away or break free. And it caused quite a couple of years of fraction actually within the family when they realised that I wasn't going to follow the life plan that was set out for me. But it was quite interesting because it was the path I wanted to follow. And it created quite a lot of risk as well, because my father wasn't going to support me for a little while until he got over the shock. So I guess one of the things that I remember from that time is just being really clear on what I was trying to do and why I was trying to do it, even though I didn't know where it was going to end up, right? And for my career, if I look back over it, it's been a few steps forward and a few steps back, and a series of ongoing transformations. I've never really stood still. So I started off in advertising agencies. I got a job as a secretary, can you believe? And the managing director said to me, "You'll be a rubbish secretary, but you could come in as my new business assistant." And then I literally worked through and ended up as a regional director. And at a certain point, I decided I wanted to do my own thing. And I set up my consultancy, not really knowing quite what I was going to focus on, because my background was very much recruitment, but I really wanted to go into employee engagement. So I started really as a sole trader, I suppose. I was working into organisations, I was operating on an associate basis. I built my experience by going in on interim contracts and learning as much as I possibly could. And that for me was key. Just learn as much as you possibly can from whoever is around and just tailgate them and make sure that you suck in everything that they can give you, because it helps you expand quite quickly. So from there, eventually, I set up the consultancy more formally, and I guess over the last few years we've really established ourselves as specialists in the whole area of organisational culture, employee engagement, and we work with a lot of FTSE companies now across many different organisations. And one of the big milestones for me, I have also undertaken my education as I have gone through. So I have now got my degree. And I have studied neuroscience for the last 10 years. And the reason I studied neuroscience was because I couldn't understand why we couldn't, regardless of all of the structure, the process, the approaches that we had available to us, why we just couldn't release that energy internally. We just couldn't touch it. It just wouldn't fly. And the learnings that were coming out of the science community were all about how human behaviour worked, the importance of brain, mind, body integration. And I thought if I could just learn about that and soak it in and codify it down so that it was simple to communicate, then people could get it. And if they could get it, they could do something with it. So we spend a lot of time now coaching and talking to leaders, really senior board level, chief execs, all across the middle range, in terms of what they need to learn to be able to release the potential within their organisation. So it's more about understanding yourself. It's more about understanding why rest and relaxation is really important. It's about vulnerability. It's about empathy. It's about clarity. It's about understanding. It's about suspending judgment. Can't do that if you're emotionally stressed out. So we spend a lot of time in that space. But we're also now going further down into the organisation, into the teams themselves. Because one of the things that I have learned is what we now know about how we operate, if you like, as human beings. It's as appropriate for somebody who's not in work as it is for somebody who is in work. And actually one of the most fascinating things when we run our workshops, it's really bizarre because these are really professional people. They work in business, they are full of strategy and objectives and everything. But when it comes to the questions, the first questions are always about something that's happened in their private life, something that's going on with family or friends, and then it comes back to work. So I found that fabulous, and I suppose it really lights me up because I can see the difference that it makes. And I talk to people, I've been doing workshops and courses now for quite a long period of time, and there was a lady that came up to me a couple of months ago who had listened or had been in one of my workshops 3 years ago, and she came up and she said, "I've still got my notes and I still refer to them every single day." And that for me was amazing. And I suppose one of my big milestones, if I remember where I come from, leaving school at 16, was being in a FTSE organisation, in the board, talking to the board about all of the things that we can do to influence engagement and influence culture. And you know when you just sit there and go, wow, if only you knew what I was doing when I was 15. And that for me was amazing. And I suppose the other thing is we work a lot on referral, we work a lot on network. And I loved it when that day happened, when people were ringing and saying, can Minerva just do this, rather than Deborah, can you come and do this? Can Minerva do this? Can Minerva come to this? Because then they were talking about the business. And that for me was when it switched from being a business that was one person to a company that had a reputation and a brand. And so I love it.
Lovely. Deborah, taking off from that part, all three of you are now entrepreneurs, pursuing your own businesses, creating a legacy for yourself in a niche in the industry. Just throwing that out there, what and how do you work on creating your personal identity? How do you manage to keep it different from the business and the business side of it? And along the way, while you've done so and come across people that could sometimes, be stubborn, be a bit challenging, each one of you are dealing, like you said, with leaders of organizations, people who believe they hold years of experience, some sense of superiority, if I may blatantly put it out there. So how do you unapologetically stand for your self-worth? And how have you dealt with it while also kind of molding your own identity?
Well, from my perspective, it's truly believing in what you do, because if you believe in what you do, then everyone else around you will believe what you do as well. Whether you're working for a CEO or whether you're working for a Nobel Prize winner, if you're on the same level, we're all human beings at the end of the day, whether you're a billionaire or whether you're, an everyday person, we're all human beings. And I think that probably all of us align in the fact that one of our passions is people. And if you love people, you will always find a common ground with them. I feel like I could talk to everyone as an individual in this room and we can talk about something that we have a common ground on, whatever walk of life someone is from. But if you're going into any kind of job or position where you're judging that person or you feel like you're on a back foot, you will never achieve results because you're always kind of trying to prove yourself.
Thank you.
I think for me it's been about really understanding what my own values are, like knowing them and thinking about them, but then just becoming really, really clear about what they are. That's helped guide me ultimately, and that's how I built my identity as a leader, with being a young leader, not so young anymore obviously, but young leader at the time of joining Gucci Group and kind of being thrown into this huge arena with incredible leaders that had loads of years of experience, obviously imposter syndrome or whatever we want to call it. I think I've always suffered with that, but the understanding what my values were became my moral compass, became what I would stand behind. And certainly, during the pandemic, for example, it became so clear that, soft skills are actually the skills to have, not, they're not just kind of secondary skills. And I kind of felt at that time as well, being in human resources, you really had to stand behind what you believed in, because companies had to take really difficult decisions, especially at Stella McCartney, where we'd always been very values-led organisation, to then have to cut jobs and, close stores and things like that. It was really, really tough. But I was able to do that and navigate my way through because I stuck to what I felt was true and trying to be as authentic to that as possible the whole time.
I think for me it's similar. It probably came later in life, actually, if I'm honest. But certainly now, being really clear and taking some time to really understand what my values are, rather than trying to emulate the values of other people, possibly, certainly people that I see as successful, then that's been quite a journey for me. And when I was younger, I guess I was just so intent on just getting out of a situation and starting to be successful in the life that I had chosen, that I almost got my head against the road so far that I wasn't paying enough attention to what my values were. And if I thought I needed to behave like that person over there to get there, then I kind of got swayed. And what I'm finding is when I get really tired or I haven't been looking after myself, it's very easy to get pulled in a direction that you don't actually want to go in. So I guess over time, I've learned that I do need to understand my values, but I also need to look after myself very, very well, because otherwise those values can get lost in the middle of a busy life and trying to be somebody and be something for everybody else. So that's been quite important. And from a business point of view, just making sure that because for me the business, I suppose, because what we do, it is a reflection of my values and what I want to make sure that they're respected and they're held well, and therefore when we notice behaviours that are not sitting alongside those values, then we can call them out, and we can call them out well. But I'm not going to pretend it's easy, because particularly when you're younger, particularly when you're starting out, sometimes we can be lost or get lost trying to emulate other people, that instead of I'm Deborah and I'm comfortable with Deborah, it's kind of I'm Deborah but I'm trying to copy you. And that doesn't actually work. But it takes a bit of years and it takes a bit of knowledge to be able to work out who the Deborah is, and a lot of self-reflection. But I think that comes with time. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Deborah, just continuing from where you said about how your team or your business is obviously going to be a reflection and an extension of who you are as far as your values and systems and places come in. Talking and taking off from that point, while you go ahead and scale, right? So whether it's expanding through different geographies, expanding your team and growing, just a little something on that front. How has that journey been so far? And any advice you have for entrepreneurs that are sitting in this room, looking at different geographies, looking at reaching out to a different industry, or just growing their team, and how that whole thing has gone on so far?
You have to be really clear and keep returning to what are my values and what do we represent, and that then has to, from my perspective anyway, it flows through everything you're doing. It flows through the individuals that you're onboarding and that you're recruiting and that form your team. It flows through the way that you then hold conversations and have conversations internally. It also flows through the way you respond to situations with clients, and also the types of clients that you bring on board, because we've had instances where the client's values are so far away from our values that it just doesn't work, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. We're not forcing our values on other people, but if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. And in those situations, it's best to leave it be. But then there are other organisations that are really trying very hard to shift where they are and what they're trying to do, and that's where we probably have our most impact. So I think it's just never underestimating how quickly it can slide in the wrong direction if you take your eye off the ball around behaviours. And it's not just the emotions and the behaviours, it's also the language you use and the mindset that you bring into play. You'll know that as much as anybody. So that's quite a full-time job in itself. And as you go further up the leadership ladder, actually, as you bring in very capable people to do the mechanics, if you like, of the day job, that's what that leadership role is all about.
But I think as well, you have to have the confidence for anyone that's, let's say, a sole trader or working by themselves that's listening. You have to have the confidence to be able to say, I can't recreate myself. Yeah. I can't create 100 of me. Yeah. And it's that acceptance that you're willing to build a team that are fairly similar to you, but that also fill in the gaps that you clearly have as a leader as well, because you can never duplicate yourself. But if you can accept that, then you can build and you can grow, and then you can become something much bigger. But those people who are so protective of their self-image and that they don't want anyone else to be doing what they're doing, they will never be able to grow because they're scared of failure as well. And it's with those failings that you actually do learn to grow.
That's true. Abigail, I know now you're, playing dual roles as a professional, as an entrepreneur. Something that's a little bit more exciting for me is where I like to find how people continue to stay inspired and self-motivated. My father, who's the founder of Della Leadersclub, Jimmy Mistry, that's one thing he's always told me, and especially while we were making that shift to New York, that he was like, you're not going to be answerable to someone. You're not going to be reporting to anybody. Your successes are on your own. Your failures are your own. So just learn to self-motivate and self-sustain how you continue going. And, that's always got me thinking that it's true that, if I do something well, there's no one giving me a tap on my back but me alone. So, how do you kind of work on that? And how do you stay inspired and motivated, juggling around with both roles?
Yeah. I think for me, it's about just knowing what my true creative passions are. I think creativity is where I'm probably the most inspired, and when you're focusing on, you know, downtime and the importance of downtime to be re-energized and re-inspired, it's usually somewhere within the creative space for me, and that's what I love to do. And I think it's about just knowing what it is that gives you that energy. And for me, it's also about learning from others, and just trying to absorb as much as possible. I mean, there's too much content out there. It can become overwhelming, but picking and choosing the things that, you know, you want to listen to and you want to learn more from, that's really what inspires me.
Perfect.
But I think can I just say one thing as well? I think as women, we're not allowed to talk that much about our successes as well. So whereas that we're not allowed to be as vocal and say, well, I did this, I'm so proud of myself, because you would be put in a box. Whereas sometimes it's okay, let's say, for a man to be extremely, you know, career driven, and he can be put in that box, whereas it's not the same always for a woman. So I think there's slightly difference there in that sense as well.
Ellen, that's completely true. You know, something where I realize a lot of this happens is a place like LinkedIn. You know, now everyone very proudly shares something that comes across. But women and men, and compared to what's happening, I don't see as many of my friends and women really talking about what they do. And men could, you know, or the friends that I have could just immediately say, okay, while I've switched a role or got another thing, oh, I was invited here, oh, I was mentioned by this one, oh, this was happening. And I think the other aspect of that imposter syndrome was for people to understand and accept that, you know, when you share what you're doing, it's not always self-promotion, it's not always self-bragging, and especially for companies and businesses such as where, you know, the founders are kind of in the DNA of the organization. It's your role and responsibility to get the message out there, because, you know, Deborah, like you said, Minerva works on relationship word of mouth. So, you know, somewhere as a founder, you feel the obligation to do it. I personally always think twice and hesitate before I share something about DLC. And that's the first instance that it happens to me. And I say that, you know, am I promoting an event? Am I, you know, putting out registrations? Not that it's too beneath me, but just the fact that, you know, is it going to be too in someone's face? But then when you look at what other people do and the kind of passion that they showcase, you know, I have a friend who's a wedding and event planner. Every single time that she sees me share someone's proposal picture and congratulate them on Instagram, the first thing she'll message is, hey, make an introduction. And that for me is you're literally unapologetically getting into the conversation. You're seeing someone's proposal before they can even enjoy that moment of, you know, being fiancés for the day. The message comes in that, you know, I do dance choreography, you know, I do event planning, you know, I have a panel, make that introduction. So I guess, you know, somewhere, and that's when I turn back around and I tell myself that, you know, this is what it takes to really stand and believe in what you do. Because like you said, when you have that confidence about knowing what you want to do and kind of coming in, I think that makes a big difference. So ladies, before, you know, the last bit, I want to leave the floor open and let everyone also have their turn to ask your questions. But, you know, just as a closing, one bit of advice you would give on tackling imposter syndrome to somebody who's a client or a person in the organization, and just a little something that you tell yourself. So two very different versions of it, and if it's the same, no worries. We can always come back to it, and if anyone has a question, we can start with that.
So I can probably kick off with that. So for me, imposter syndrome is an interesting thing. I would never suggest that somebody should either ignore it or try and battle through it, because it comes back 100 times harder. I think the other thing is just be aware that imposter syndrome is different to lack of confidence or lack of self-belief. Lack of confidence and lack of self-belief is still difficult, but it's tackled in an easier way. Imposter syndrome is a difference between, it's my identity, it's what I see myself as rather than what I do. And actually you can't fight that. You have to work with it, and you have to start with the mind first. You have to be able to reduce the negative chatter. And then when you get down into the imposter syndrome, it's It's about alleviating those deep-seated beliefs. You have to work with the body. You have to work on it carefully. And actually, there's no point somebody telling you to get over it either. Or even the more somebody tells you that you're good at something, if you're suffering from imposter syndrome, it'll just keep screaming at you that you're not good at it. So that's a much longer and a much more considered journey to get to the end of that. It's different to lack of confidence. There's a perfectly good way of clearing it out. It just takes a longer time. But don't push through it, don't ignore it, and don't think it contributes to the success, because it's not. It's something else.
For me, as someone who has suffered with imposter syndrome a lot of my career, I found when I think of myself as the best possible me before I go into a scenario, and it might actually be nothing to do with the work-related scenario. It could be if I'm hosting a dinner party, for example, I'm really in my element. I try to, remember what I feel like during that moment, and really bring those feelings of the best me before I go in somewhere, and that's helped me a lot in a lot of different situations.
Thank you.
I guess from my perspective, it's that everyone is the same. You don't know what's going on inside someone's head when you're all in a room together. That's the thing. So what's going through your head before you've left the house, before you've made that decision, when you've left the house for the day, you've gone through loads of things. You might be in a meeting with 50 other people. They've probably gone through similar things. So just remember that everyone's human.
Lovely. Thank you. Any questions? Amin.
My first question to Elin would obviously be that, am I dressed well?
Very well. If I had a rosette, I would place it on you now.
But getting to the question, as an entrepreneur myself, and yourself as well, of course, on a down day, on a bad day, on a situation that you're stuck, how do you kind of pull yourself? I mean, what is the conversation you have with yourself to kind of pull you up from that?
Yeah, I think that's hourly now, not just daily even. A day in the life of a business owner is like this constantly. You could have a high 1 minute and think, wow, I'm really on top of things. I've got it down, yeah? And then the next minute you get a call and you're thinking, oh no, how did I let this happen? But it's just knowing that if you fall apart as a leader, nobody's got anyone to look up to then. That's the thing. So you have to keep on top of it all the time, because if you don't, then it will all crumble underneath you because people look up to you. And that's, I think, one of that should be one of the things a good leader should embody. They should be able to take on the highs and the lows and be able to balance it out and absorb those lows as well, sometimes on behalf of your team.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think, Sanaya.
I have a quick question. So as someone who comes from an entrepreneurial background, I've always struggled with, I currently work in corporate environment. For me, the hardest thing to switch is the lack of stability in your own business. I feel like you don't have the monthly income coming in. You don't always have, no matter how much work you do, there's always something to fall back on. How do you make that switch or get comfortable with the instability?
I'm not sure you actually do, really. It's just something you start to live with and you get used to. And I guess for me, one of the things that has always been really important was just to keep I've always kept a slush fund. I've always put something away. So there's always something there. I've never been that far on the edge. And that just gives a little bit of a comfort factor. But it's, I don't know, it's not something you really get used to, is it? It's just something you just...
No, never. And I feel like you're willing to do it or you're not willing to do it. When I interview people and I say to them, are you sure you want to be a freelancer because you might not be able to make your mortgage payment next month? And they say, what? Oh, I didn't realise that. But if you haven't got that drive, but when you have been at your very lowest, you know what it takes to get back up. That's the thing. So you've got to, like I said, you've got to take the highs and the lows, haven't you, and be willing to do it.
I've also found, actually, it's been interesting, I don't know if you found this, but when we take on, when we're working with associates or people that have just gone into the contracting field, there's almost like a break point of 18 months. If they stick it for 18 months, they get used to it or they work it through and they actually stay there long term. But if they give up before 18 months, and a lot do, then they go back into corporate because it's just not for them, because they can't live with that. It's a risk thing. They can't live with that risk.
And it's that entrepreneurial spirit. If you're a true entrepreneur, yeah, you will, have a van, open it up and sell things from the back of it. If your business is not doing well, you'll find a way to make it work. Whereas if you're not a true entrepreneur, you'll find a way out.
Yeah, that's true.
I think I have a very basic question, which is, what do you call imposter syndrome? And I ask that because we spoke about sticking to our core values in spite of everything. And we also spoke about, as a leader, you have to, even though your heart might be sinking, you've got to put on a brave face because your team needs you and people need you. I am not an entrepreneur, but I work in sales, and in many ways I feel like sales is, in a way, running a business within the security of a business. More often than not, I am in a room full of, 50 plus CXOs, the youngest person, and also, of course, a woman leader in that sense. And often I will come out of a meeting, and it might just be a 30-minute meeting, but I will have to, okay, that was hard, just like let it out and then build yourself back in. So I guess that's the question, saying that what is imposter syndrome to you? Is it putting on a brave face even when you're not, or compromising values? Is that what it is?
To me, it's just feeling like you're going to be found out, that you shouldn't be there in the room for whatever reason. It's that feeling that, someone's going to realise that I shouldn't be here. That's what it is to me. And so that takes a lot of work to recognise that that's actually just something I'm telling myself in my head. It's not actually the truth. And perhaps everyone else feels that same way as well. In fact, it is a human condition that, we want to be heard, we want to be liked, and we want to feel competent. We want to feel like others think that we're competent. And so it's kind of all tied in with that. That's what I consider it to be.
I don't know it as well as you know it from a personal point of view, but having spoken to quite a number of people about it, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it can be quite crippling. It's the sort of thing that wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you just can't get rid of it. It completely paralyses you in terms of what it is you're trying to do and the work that you're trying to deliver. And actually, that's why I say you have to be quite clear about the distinction between just lack of confidence and imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is something very different. So if you're going into a meeting and you're coming out and you're going, is that because you need to enhance your skills a bit more, or just need to expose yourself to those environments a bit more, because that's a confidence thing, which is actually quite easy to sort out, right? Or is it crippling to the point that you really believe that what you were doing in that meeting is far outside of what you as an individual should be doing? And that's a deep-seated belief. And that takes deeper work and longer time. But my view would be you don't ignore that and don't try and push through it. But the example you gave of thinking about something that works well is really helpful. And people keep little wins files so that you can remind yourself. And you have to keep saying, okay, so I believe that, but where's the evidence? Is that really happening? But you have to work with the body to get that out, I'm sure.
So we talked a lot about culture and how important it is to kind of put the values and your beliefs into the company. So I can see how this is very easy when you have a small company, but my question is, how do you achieve that when you have a very big company and you don't have time yourself to spend time with all the employees? So how do you transmit this culture when, let's say, you come to the company and you have to change the culture? Where do you start?
So a little more context, Lana is a second generation entrepreneur in the family business, and I think it's something that I can always relate to. So I mean, that's what I think, with better context, they'll be able to help us both answer this.
I think if the company has defined its own values, that is really helpful, and its own purpose. Again, you can think that a company has really strong values. Again, I'll use the example of Della, really purpose-led organization, but we weren't very clear about what our values were in, a really sharp sense. But when you do that as an organisation, you can bring people around that belief, and so people can see themselves, in those values. They can see their own contribution to the greater purpose of that organisation, and I think that's how you do it. And you hire an HR person.
I just have one last question, and that's directly to Pearl, because I've seen you as a child. You have over a period of time grown from an individual, strong-headed woman, just like your father and your beautiful mother, to somebody who is now traveling the globe and like the central pole of a tent of a circus that we are all in. How do you manage to keep that circus going? Where is your emotional anchor? Most of the women are shy. Being a clinical psychologist, most of the women are shy to talk about their emotional anchor. We're in 2022. I don't see women any different. But as a young girl with a very strong-headed father and mother, and working on several personalities simultaneously, understanding fragile egos of men and women, how do you manage to now move city to city, people to people, connecting, and still remain that still emotional anchor? I'm interested in that growth.
So thank you. Those were very kind words. A couple of years ago, I had a life coach, and I shared with her that I shared my whole plea about that, I'm not taken seriously sometimes. Just looking at my age or my gender or my lack of experience, sometimes you're not taken seriously in the room. And sometimes you overcame that because some days it didn't let me stop what I was doing. I continued doing it till I proved a point. But with time, she told me, and I kind of told her that perhaps, I should change. Perhaps I should not be this nice, sweet, mild, easygoing person. Perhaps I should not let people understand. And a lot of people that are very intuitive say that, oh, you're a very empathetic individual. And I said, maybe this is what's kind of backfiring, right? So now I'm going to create this other personality and have this persona where my personal life and my professional life is different. Especially when you have a family business, it kind of helps. And she told me, she was like, this sounds like a great plan, and you've thought this whole thing through, and you're going to be taken very seriously, and you'll be a little rude with some people and put them to their place. But she was like, you work 10 hours a day. And she was like, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. She was like, that's who you're going to become. So she was like, if that's what you want, that's how you want to take it, that's who you're going to become. And that's when I realized that, some things that I kind of hold on to, the things that you say, that what are you most proud of? I think there's certain values that I have. I'm not immediately hesitant to be humble and apologetic. I'm one to quickly own up my mistake. And I realize that just being empathetic and polite as a person is what I stand for. So when you realize those core values, going city to city, that becomes your emotional anchor. You can upset somebody, you can do something, but I think the ability to quickly apologize and correct your mistake out helps no matter the situation or scenario you're in. It has been a difficult move. You leave your family and home. And I always joked about the fact that I would never leave India. And that's when it struck me as I continued growing up. It was in India. I was very attached to the family business and what it stood for. And when I realized I had the opportunity to actually take that to a new location, and that opened up a door, is when I said, I'm actually ready to move. Because it was no longer, I'm not leaving India. It was, I wasn't leaving the company. I also was a passionate second generation entrepreneur wanting to do something. So I guess that just kind of helped me move. And some days are low. Some days you look up to people like them to seek, inspiration. And for me, I always follow and, get silently inspired. It was a concept I came across and I realized it's true. So for instance, you seek mentors in people you haven't met. So whether it's someone like Sarah Blakely or someone like Whitney Wolf, you're seeing what they're doing. You don't know them, they don't know you, but you're kind of like being mentored by what they are and what their journey is. And when you kind of hear stories and just speak to more people, and like you said, everyone comes from a situation where there's a lot happening. And when you start accepting that and you realize you're not the only one, so don't lose momentum now and keep going. I think that's something that's worked for me so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.